Jesse's eyebrow news. There we go.
Claire's going to tweet about this.
Yes, I'm setting myself up big. All right, feeling festive? Christmas tree eyebrows are the new rage. Yes, look at this. They're decorating them with art and glitter and glue, little baubles for the holiday season. Isn't that Christmassy?
Cool.
That is the war on Christmas.
You like it?
Personified.
That is grotesque.
It's really
love it. I would do that for a shoot. Not another shoot.
Oh, great. We're going to do it
that.
next Tuesday.
Also, Waters World. Look, we have Willie Robertson from Duck Dynasty, Jerry Falwell Jr. Wow, Ed Diamond and Silk. What a mix!
Yeah,
and I interviewed a migrant from the caravan. Migrant from the caravan comes into Waters World 8 p.m.
Okay, we only left 15 seconds for you, Emily, but you talk fast.
I'll be fast. That's good. On a cold Thursday afternoon, Ohio's Norton Fire Division received a call of a dog that had fallen through the ice into a pond. The firefighters quickly sprang into action, rushed to the dog's location. They found him struggling in the frigid waters. One firefighter bravely jumped into the water, broke through the ice to rescue the scared pump. He was able to reach the dog.
That is it for us. We'll see you back here on Monday. Emily will be on Fox & Friends Saturday and Sunday. You won't want to miss that. Special report is up next. I can't talk as fast as her. Hey, Bret.
Thanks, Dana. You have a dog? All right. Anyway, President Trump signs a trade deal, avoids Putin, and comes face-to-face with the Saudi Crown Prince all in one day at the annual G20 summit. Here at home, Alaskans are rocked by a 7-point earthquake this afternoon. And your recent hotel stay could be one of the largest data breaches in history. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Bret Baier, coming to you tonight from the beautiful Ronald Reagan Presidential Library here in Simi Valley, California, where I'm taking part in the annual Reagan National Defense Forum this weekend, bringing together some of the top brass, including Defense Secretary James Mattis, to address the health of our national defense. More on that in just a bit. But first, President Trump is abroad tonight at the G20 summit in Argentina, where our standing in the world is in the spotlight as the president meets with several world leaders, even as he avoids others. But while he praised a new trade deal with Canada and Mexico today, the Russia investigation was not far from his mind, as his administration placed the blame for sour relations with Russia on the special counsel. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is in Buenos Aires tonight with a look at the day's events. Good evening, John.
Bret, good evening to you. These G20 summits are structured to really highlight global cooperation. But for President Trump and his America First policy, it's really the individual relationships between nations that matter. President Trump began his day with the historic signing of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. He hopes putting the final nail in NAFTA.
The USMCA is the largest, most significant, modern and balanced trade agreement in history. All of our countries will benefit greatly. It is probably the largest trade deal ever made also.
The president still has some heavy lifting. He needs to get the agreement through Congress, and passage is not assured. President Trump also has a challenge tomorrow when he meets with China's President Xi. The White House is hoping for a breakthrough between the two leaders to end the escalating trade war. Failure could cement economic worries that sent the stock markets into convulsions over the past few weeks. Even as he focused on trade, President Trump had an eye on the Mueller investigation and the Michael Cohen plea today, starting his day with a tweet that read, "Lightly looked at doing a building somewhere in Russia, put up zero money, zero guarantees, and didn't do the project. Witch hunt." Russian officials added to the intrigue today, claiming President Trump canceled his meeting with Vladimir Putin not because of the situation in Ukraine, but because of political heat back home.
Is the Kerch provocation created by Kiev in this region the real reason for canceling the meeting? Officially, we heard that, but is this the reality? I think we have to search for the answers in the domestic political situation in the United States.
Press Secretary Sarah Sanders fired back. The Russian witch hunt hoax, which is hopefully now nearing an end, is doing very well. Unfortunately, it probably does undermine our relationship with Russia. However, the reason for our canceled meeting is Ukraine. Hopefully that will be resolved soon so that productive conversations can begin. President Trump managed to avoid a potentially controversial moment, speaking only briefly with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman today. The White House says the two leaders exchanged pleasantries but did not have a substantive conversation. President Trump has sided with bin Salman in the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, fearing that isolating him could jeopardize fat contracts for American companies and drive Saudi Arabia into the arms of Russia. Those concerns were reinforced today when Vladimir Putin, who doesn't give a lick about optics, warmly high-fived the Saudi leader. Plenty of Putin's critics have ended up dead, and the two seem genuinely happy to see each other.
While the president was able to celebrate,
there is still an opportunity for President Trump to speak, albeit potentially briefly, with both Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman out of sight of the cameras tonight when he joins the rest of the G20 leaders for dinner. Brett?
John Roberts, live in Buenos Aires tonight. John, thanks. As we said, the Russia investigation is not far from the president's mind while he's in Argentina. And back in Washington, there have been new developments in the case against the president's former campaign chairman. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harrods joins us with more. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett, and good evening. The special counsel has until next week to explain why the plea fell apart as more legal action is threatened. Paul Manafort's legal team arrived at the federal court in Washington for the short hearing where special counsel prosecutor Andrew Weissman indicated more criminal charges are under consideration, including offenses Manafort admitted to but was never charged with. Manafort's lawyers say the special counsel is using pressure tactics, and the plea deal broke down because Mueller's team wants information their client cannot provide. A tentative sentencing is now scheduled for March.
Mr. Cohen has cooperated.
A day after the president's former personal attorney pled guilty to lying to Congress, Donald Trump Jr.'s 2017 Senate testimony about the Moscow real estate proposal is under scrutiny. While Michael Cohen claimed he briefed the Trump family, the president's son said he knew, quote, very little about the deal, adding, it sort of faded away, I believe, at the end of 2014. That timeline appears to conflict with Cohen, who said discussions continued until June 2016. Separately, Felix Sater, a Russian-born real estate developer, broached the idea of a penthouse for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Sater did not comment to Fox on the penthouse proposal, but said, quote, no matter which capital you built this caliber of a project in, you would need cooperation of local government. A former Justice Department official is reserving judgment.
The big question is whether it crosses the line to establish some sort of criminal wrongdoing on the part of the president or those close to him. I think that is the big question. Politically damaging, yes. What are the legal consequences? I would say to be determined. Pointing to a double standard, Fox News has learned the president's legal team is revisiting their 2017 request to Mueller and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to investigate former FBI Director James Comey over the accuracy of his sworn congressional testimony. Comey's lawyers were also in court today battling a congressional subpoena for a closed-door interview under oath. The committee chairman accused the former director of using the same legal tactics as the firm behind the anti-Trump dossier.
He is trying to run the clock on us, and that's why we think he's filed this motion to quash. Fusion GPS also tried that. They were knocked down, and instead he came in, Glenn Simpson came in and took the fifth.
Late today, the judge said he may rule on the Comey subpoena as early as Monday. Comey wants a public hearing because he accuses some of the committee members of selective leaks, even though 16 other committee witnesses have agreed to a closed-door interview, including former senior FBI leadership. Brett.
To Ukraine.
Catherine Harrods live in Washington. Catherine,
you're
thanks.
welcome.
Ukraine is now stopping many Russian men from traveling to the country as it fears a takeover by Russia, similar to that in Crimea. Correspondent Trey Yingst with the latest on increasing tensions tonight from our Mideast Bureau.
Russian men, ages 16 to 60, are now banned from traveling to Ukraine amid growing fears of a ground invasion from Russia. Reports indicate the main focus for this restriction will be the 1,200-mile land border between the two countries, although the new ban applies to all ports of entry. The policy, announced by Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko on Twitter, is an attempt by his government to prevent a further land grab by Russia.
This measure prevents forming of units of private armies by the Russian Federation, which are in fact representatives of the Russian Federation's armed forces.
The new travel ban comes as reports today indicate the 24 Ukrainian sailors who were captured during Sunday's clash off the coast of Crimea have been moved to a detention facility in Moscow, further raising tensions between the two countries. Ukraine's parliament voted this week in favor of Poroshenko's proposal to implement martial law, giving the country the ability to limit travel, impose curfews, and easily mobilize military units. The new restrictions are already being felt along the Ukraine-Russia border, where families are experiencing the escalation of the conflict.
I'm a Ukrainian citizen. I arrived at a checkpoint to meet my brother with his family, mother and children. My brother is 48 years old and he was not allowed to enter.
A spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry indicated Friday that Moscow has no plans to retaliate with similar travel restrictions for Ukrainian citizens. Daily life in Ukraine following Sunday's clash off the coast of Crimea is gradually approaching a state of war as diplomatic efforts are trying to avoid a full-scale military confrontation. Brett?
Trey, thanks. In 2014, when Russia took over Crimea, our late colleague Charles Krauthammer had this to say about that moment.
Putin has taken over the Crimean Peninsula. He now is in a position to take other parts of Ukraine if he wants. This is Russia's attempt to grab Ukraine as a way to reconstitute a mini-Soviet empire. When Hitler went into the Sudetenland, he claimed it was in response to a desire on the part of the population. This is what all dictators do.
So what is Putin's desire now? For more analysis on all of this, we turn to two of my Fox News colleagues joining me here at the Reagan National Defense Forum, National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin and Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. Gorgeous setting, right?
Again, for the second year in a row, and having covered Reagan for 6 years, whenever I come here, I think of his sunny disposition in his sense that the sun is rising, not setting on America.
What about the sun in Ukraine? What is the sense of this tense moment there, as Russia clearly is doing something?
Well, yes, absolutely, and they have decided to issue this provocation by basically claiming control over the Kerch Strait. On the one hand, you could argue that Donald Trump has been a lot more proactive than Barack Obama when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. He has sent lethal weapons, advanced artillery to the Ukrainians. President Obama refused to do that. On the other hand, he's made it very clear that he understands that Russia has much more direct interest in Ukraine and especially in Crimea. I'd be curious to hear what Jennifer has to say, but I don't think that he's going to get much more deeply involved in this.
You know, he canceled that meeting in G20 with Putin, saying the reason was the Ukrainian action. You know, people speculated whether there was more to that cancellation or not. But what do you think? How big an issue will it be here at the Defense Forum, this Ukrainian action?
Well, I think it'll be one of many flashpoints that they're going to be discussing. If you look at where we were a year ago, Brett, standing here on November 29, 2017, the North Koreans had just fired their third intercontinental ballistic missile. All of the talk here at the forum was how to deter North Korea. This time, the discussion is really going to center around defense budgets. That's where you're going to see a lot of flashpoints, because you have a new defense strategy that articulates that we're going to have to focus on and deter Russia and China, but it comes at a time that you've just gotten a $716 billion budget, one of the largest of all times, and already the president is talking about having the Defense Department cut by 5% when they're just starting to deal with all sorts of readiness issues. You have a new Democrat coming in as the head of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith. He says that he wants to cut the defense budget. So the tension here is going to be, how do you do more with less budget?
And you've done some amazing stories about the state of our U.S. military right now, even as they look at those numbers. Charles Krauthammer is on my mind for some reason today. Here he is in 1986 talking about the Reagan Doctrine.
I think it has now come to mean this policy of support for guerrilla movements. It's our belief in wars of national liberation. It amounts to a very significant shift in our history of containment. It's a new way to contain the Soviet Union. It's containment aimed at the latest acquisitions of the Soviet Empire.
I mean, he kind of explained that, Chris, and you were obviously covering the White House during that time. Is there a Trump doctrine that we can pin down?
Let me just also say that the Reagan doctrine when it came to the Russians was, we win, they lose.
Right.
And I think that President Trump has a very different view of the world. First of all, America first. And that, yes, we have alliances and we have adversaries, but we have a very kind of narrow focus on what helps our country. And we see this both with our enemies and our adversaries. For instance, NATO. Ronald Reagan talked an enormous amount about the unity, the sanctity of the Atlantic Alliance and taking on the Soviet Union. President Trump has much more of a kind of practical, transactional sense of what our relationship is with NATO certainly than Ronald Reagan did. And again, it's America first, very narrow interest. Take a look at Saudi Arabia. Obviously, we're horrified by the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but on the other hand, we have national security interests, so we're going to put up with a lot of stuff.
Did you see that moment where the Crown Prince gave a high five to Vladimir Putin before one of those meetings today? I think we have that tape. It was quite interesting. There it is. Almost saying, I got your back. I don't know what that message was.
Well, you know, I remembered my interview with Putin when I said, why is it so many people that oppose you end up dead? And as I saw them high-fiving each other, I wondered if they were thinking the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun this weekend. Go ahead, last word.
Well, it'll be interesting. And the one thing that Reagan didn't do is he didn't cut the defense budget. And so to cut 5% out of this defense budget, that's $30 billion. What is that going to do to readiness? What is it going to do to deterrence? That's what the discussion is going to focus on here.
Should be very interesting. Thank you both very much. I'll be interviewing the Defense Secretary tomorrow. You'll see that live on Fox News Channel. The reason Krauthammer perhaps is on my mind is because his son, Daniel Krauthammer, will join us Monday for his new book, The Point of It All. He has completed the book. He edited it, but it was his father's book, and he finished it as he passed. Daniel Krauthammer, first time he's talking about it, 6 p.m. Monday. Now to other news. 2 earthquakes measuring 7.0 and 5.7 rocked Anchorage today. Incredible pictures and video of the damage done still coming in from Alaska as the neighbors to the north of me here in California capture these images of the quake. Thankfully, no injuries have been reported yet. Correspondent Dan Springer joins us live from our Northwest Bureau with a look at the aftermath. Good evening, Dan.
Yeah, good evening, Brett. They are still assessing the damage in and around Anchorage, but we already know this. It is major and will cause problems getting around Anchorage for many months. The earthquake was centered in Point McKenzie, just 5 miles north of downtown Anchorage, home to about 280,000 Alaskans. The ground shook for over a minute, causing severe damage to roads, bridges, breaking water mains, and knocking out power to tens of thousands. It triggered a tsunami warning, which was later canceled. Also, the 800-mile oil pipeline, the money-making lifeblood of the state, has been shut down as a precaution. There are no reports of damage to that pipeline. The airport was also shut down for a while, but planes are again being allowed to take off and land. The regional head of FEMA is on his way to Anchorage, and the state's congressional delegation just held a news conference.
It has impacted the major arterials in and around Anchorage, and that is a concern.
The video, as you see, is dramatic. This was on the 6th floor of the courthouse in downtown Anchorage. You can see things banging against the walls and people taking cover. There are reports of widespread damage, primarily to the many houses in the area. Wasilla's own Sarah Palin, the former governor and vice presidential candidate, put out on social media that her family is intact, but her house is not. Alaska is the most seismically active state in the country, with 10,000 earthquakes per year and 45 a year that range in strength between magnitude 6 and 7. But it's rare to see a quake this strong in Anchorage. The great news, there are no reports of any deaths or even significant injuries. But there was plenty of drama. We got a picture taken by the guy who was driving this truck. When the earthquake started, it was dark outside. He stopped the truck. When he got out, the road had collapsed around him. He's okay, but like so many Alaskans today, nerves have been shaken, and it's still too early to tell exactly the extent of the damage. Brett?
Dan Springer in our Northwest Bureau. Dan, thanks. The number of active duty troops along the border with Mexico will go down, but the Department of Homeland Security is requesting civilian law enforcement from several other departments to try to fill the void. Officials say the Homeland Security Department submitted a formal request for the additional civilian support today. This as we learn the number of active duty troops along the border will drop from 5,600 to 4,000. It will be extended, though, through January. Up next, your recent hotel stay could have opened you up to one of the biggest hacks in history. First, what some of our other affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 40 in Sacramento, where body camera footage shows what people have called the closest thing to hell. This video from a California sheriff's deputy shows him nearly overrun by flames as he helped evacuate people from the deadly campfire in Paradise. Incredibly, he and a group of stranded nurses survived all of this by finding a bulldozer that helped them escape. Fox 35 in Richmond, where the court in the James Fields murder trial will allow 2 Instagram posts showing a car running into protesters with the caption, "You have a right to protest, but I'm late to work," into evidence. Prosecution says it shows premeditation and debunks the defense argument that Fields was acting in self-defense when he drove his car into the crowd of counter-protesters at a white nationalist rally last August. And this is a live look at Las Vegas from our affiliate Fox 5 out there. The big is some financial help for survivors of last October's shooting at that concert. The Department of Justice announcing it will grant $16.7 million in funding, aid funding to the survivors of the shooting. The money will be used to assist in paying for things like therapy to not just the survivors, but anyone who helped that October night. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back here to Simi Valley, California, after this.
This program is...
Welcome back to Simi Valley, California. If you're one of the nearly 500 million people who have stayed at a Marriott-owned hotel, your personal information could be at risk tonight. The company says its guest reservation system was breached in what is now the second largest private sector hack in the past decade. Correspondent Jillian Turner with what information could now be exposed.
Marriott International, the world's largest hotel chain, confirmed today it's been hacked and that information on up to 500 million of its customers potentially compromised. That information includes customer names, birth dates, addresses, phone numbers, emails, passport numbers, and for some, even credit card info.
This data breach is a really big deal because it essentially gives people the keys to the kingdom when it comes to your identity.
This now ranks as the #2 largest data breach of the past 10 years, second only to the 2013 Yahoo hack that impacted 3 billion people. Marriott International was first alerted to a possible breach in September and launched an investigation that found unauthorized access had been ongoing since 2014, nearly 4 years. On November 19th, the company located the breach within its Starwood guest reservation database. But public confirmation came only this morning. Marriott telling Fox News, "We deeply regret this incident happened. We fell short of what our guests deserve and what we expect of ourselves. We're doing everything we can to support our guests and using lessons learned to be better moving forward." The company insists only customers registered on the Starwood Hotel Group database were impacted. New York's Attorney General has already opened an investigation to determine criminality, and Capitol Hill lawmakers are calling for new legislation to require stronger data protection. The Marriott International parent company includes dozens of globally recognized brands, W Hotels, the St. Regis, Sheraton, and Westin. They'll now face intense scrutiny from the SEC and EU regulators. Marriott says the company has begun emailing every individual impacted by this breach, and they've also set up a website and call hotlines for the victims. They're also offering 1 year of free identity theft monitoring through WebWatcher. Brett?
Jillian, thank you. The Marriott breach is one of several large hacks that have happened in recent years. But whatever happened to one of the biggest breaches last year, to Equifax? That breach exposed the financial information of more than 145 million Americans. Tonight, correspondent Brian Yennis looks at what has happened in the days since that hack.
The Equifax data breach accessed Social Security numbers, birth dates, and in some cases, credit card numbers. The breach was not made public until more than a month after it was discovered. Cybersecurity experts say that prompted anger and calls for reform.
This was exposing the most sensitive details, your personal information. You can't get this back once it's out there.
So what's been done since? Congress held hearings and congressional investigators along with the Federal Trade Commission have been looking into it, but so far, no enforcement enforcement actions have been announced. Virginia Senator Mark Warner has proposed legislation he hopes to introduce during the next session that would better protect consumers' information in the modern world.
Most of the crime going forward is not going to be somebody going in and robbing a bank. The smart criminals in 2019 are going to violate, kind of penetrate an Equifax or break into a company's computer and steal that data and then manipulate that data and use it for fake purchases or sell your personal information on the dark web.
Equifax says since the breach, it has spent $275 million on data security, and in a statement to Fox says, quote, "Over the past year, we have undertaken a host of security, operational, and technological improvements, including hardening our data security perimeter to improve detection and response rates and strengthening our data security protocols and controls." Experts say there are steps you can take to protect your information. Get a copy of your credit report every year. Look for any unauthorized accounts open or loans taken. You should also consider freezing your credit, which would stop someone from opening an account in your name. In New York, Brian Yennis, Fox News.
Up next, California's blue wave and whether the GOP can gain back any ground out here. Welcome back to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Microsoft today surpassed Apple as the world's most valuable publicly traded company. And if it holds through the end of the year, it will be the first year it closes out in the top position since 2002. The market finished the week in the green. The Dow was up 200. The S&P 500 closed up 22. The Nasdaq ahead 57. For the week, the Dow was up 5%. The S&P 500 had its largest one-week percentage gain since December 2011, almost 5, and the Nasdaq was up more than 5.5% this week. A good week on Wall Street. North Carolina election officials are still not ready to certify the House race in the 9th congressional district there. The state elections board voted today to hear evidence on alleged absentee ballot irregularities before deciding whether to finalize the race result. Total show Republican Mark Harris leading Democrat Dan McCready by 900 votes. For the first time in more than 70 years, Republicans will hold just 7 of California's 53 House seats following this month's midterm elections. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt takes a look at what some say led to the big blue wave here in California.
A blue tsunami. Democrats certainly rode a large wave in California. Usually reliably Republican bastions, Orange County, for instance, went from mostly red to completely blue. In 2016, Republicans held 14 of California's 53 congressional districts. Now they hold just 7 and face a bleak future, according to former Democratic political consultant Bob Shrum.
Republicans are now the third party in the state after Democrats, and declined to state or independents.
So how did it happen? For one of the down congressmen, Dana Rohrabacher, the answer is simple.
This election was bought and paid for by outside billionaires.
He points the finger at anti-Trump campaigner Tom Steyer and potential Democratic presidential contender Michael Bloomberg, who put more than $4 million into the fight to beat Rohrabacher.
I've never seen a better example of money corrupting our political system.
Other Republican Party officials are concerned about so-called ballot harvesting. Party workers going door to door and offering to deliver voters mail-in ballots on their behalf.
It's illegal in most every state of the union. In Texas and in New York State and Pennsylvania, they arrest people and put them in jail for ballot harvesting. In California, they made it legal 2 years ago.
The real reason the blue wave washed over so many Republicans, Shrum argues, is the party's move to the right.
If you had a Schwarzenegger Republican Party that was fiscally conservative and socially moderate or liberal, it would be very competitive in this state.
For now, California Republicans will cling to the hope that all politics is cyclical and the pendulum will swing back. But already emboldened Democrats are looking ahead to 2020, eyeing the handful of still held Republican seats and dreaming of another blue wave. Bret.
Jonathan, thank you. More trouble for the NFL as TMZ Sports reveals video of Kansas City Chiefs star running back Kareem Hunt shoving and kicking a 19-year-old woman in a Cleveland hotel back in February. No arrests were made, and Kareem has not missed a single game this season, despite the incident happening months before the season kicked off. Next up, our panel weighs in on the president's whirlwind 48-hour trip to the G20 so far. Keep it here. We'll be back at the Reagan Library.
Let's finish your Christmas shopping. Mother, father, Alex Cross and Bill Clinton. Sister, brother, Alex and Bill. Friends, Alex and Bill.
With our signatures today, we will formally declare the intention of our three countries to replace NAFTA with the USMCA, a truly groundbreaking achievement, modern-day agreement.
The new agreement lifts the risk of serious economic uncertainty that lingers throughout a trade renegotiation process, uncertainty that would have only gotten worse and more damaging had we not reached a new NAFTA.
This day is the culmination of a long process based on dialogue and negotiations that allow us to overcome differences and to conciliate our visions.
Mexican President Trump, and the Prime Minister of Canada there signing this trade agreement, the president calling it the biggest, most important, largest trade deal in U.S. and world history. We're here at the Reagan Library. When Reagan traveled around the world, it was the G8. Now it's the G20, and the president there. Not everyone back in Washington, though, is fully behind this new trade deal.
What isn't in it yet is enough enforcement reassurances regarding workers, provisions that relate to workers and to the environment. There also has not been a law passed in Mexico in terms of wages and working conditions in Mexico. So when all of that happens, people will make a judgment about whether they will be supporting it.
We'll start there about the president's trip to the G20. Let's bring in our panel from Washington, national security analyst Morgan Ortagus, Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist, and David Brody, chief political analyst for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Morgan, your thoughts on this trade deal and the G20 overall?
Well, I think the president is right that it is very a historic trade agreement. Trade is one of the most arcane things that any administration has to deal with, and getting this through, especially through the Mexicans and the Canadians who, held out to the very end on a few sticking points related to dairy, is an accomplishment. However, saying that, it's a little too early to measure the drapes, because now you'll have probably even tougher negotiators than the Canadians and the Mexicans, and that's the Democrats in Congress, as we just saw. I'm really looking, Brett, towards Sherrod Brown. He's a Democrat who may very well likely run for president. He has the most integrity and reputation as it relates to workers' rights and to trade. And I think he's sort of my bellwether on whether we're going to get true Democrat support to pass this in the House and the Senate.
Yeah, it's not just Democrats. A few Republicans have piped up already. Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, tweeted, as currently drafted, this deal will put Florida's seasonal vegetable growers out of business. It allows Mexico to dump government-subsidized produce on the U.S. market. Going forward, America will depend on Mexico for our winter vegetables. Unacceptable. There are a few others who have weighed in as well, Leslie.
Yeah, Senator Toomey is another. Everybody wants protections. I mean, the unions want protections for workers, specifically if more jobs go to Mexico, which is a big concern, not just by Democrats and the unions, but over on the right as well. Will there be more outsourcing? Will there be protection for investors? Will there be protection if jobs go to Mexico or other places overseas, to Nancy Pelosi's point regarding the environment and protection for workers? The president has a political win here, Brett, but are we going to see a win in Congress? I'm really not sure, because there is a lot of pushback on both sides. To Marco Rubio's point, agriculture is being affected by this. So a political win for the president, but I'm not sure what's going to happen, especially when you have Democrats taking over the House coming up in January.
Yeah, a different environment come January. Meantime, David, big issues, obviously, at the G20. The president canceling the meeting with Vladimir Putin, but the biggest meeting yet to come tomorrow night with the Chinese President Xi.
Well, that's right. And of course, all eyes will be on that meeting for sure. Bret, I got to tell you, there's a lot, obviously, not just at stake, but here's what's going on. President Trump is not at a point now where he can bluff. I mean, in other words, it's time to pony up. And what I mean by that is he can't back away at this point. There's just no way. And so what does that mean? Well, economically, America, we know, is doing pretty well. That's a good, strong hand to go into all of this with. Bottom line is, if he can come away with obviously something on intellectual property theft and also all of this forced technology transfer in terms of what the Chinese are doing, I think that's obviously going to be a big victory for this administration. Having said that, I think we've got a long road ahead of us. The one I will point out is that over 250 billion more in tariffs come January, and that's another issue that Donald Trump can raise.
I plan to ask Defense Secretary Mattis about a number of hotspots around the world, including China. Morgan, here is the president talking about this meeting yet to come with President Xi.
If we could make a deal, that'd be good. I think they want to, and I think we'd like to, and we'll see. But we'll be meeting with President Xi in a little while. But for the most part, tomorrow, I would say, would be our big meeting. But in the meantime, people are working. Our staff is working, and we have a lot of very talented people working. Larry Kudlow's representatives are dealing with them on a constant basis.
Yeah. Kind of laying the groundwork, you know, the art of the deal here.
That's true. I don't expect a full-fledged deal tomorrow. I think that the problem and the challenge here, which is different for the president than, say, what he faced in North Korea, is we really have two competing factions here. Clearly, the economic and business interests, that side of his administration, would like to get to a deal sooner rather than later because they're worried about the effects of the tariffs on the economy. But if you look at it from a national security perspective, Bret, you know, the Chinese are not going to come out and admit tomorrow what they've done on IP, the theft. They're not going to reverse, you know, 3 decades of how they've operated in society, nor Xi's plan for the future, his vision for how China is going to lead the world. So I really think, and I can't wait to hear your interview with Mattis, I think we're, not to be hyperbolic, but we're at a moment when we really are in a generational struggle with China. And I think that the president, one of the most brilliant things that he's done in this administration is for he and his team to keep the heat on the Chinese. And I hope that they continue to do it. Work towards a deal, but there's no need to come out of this weekend with some sort of magic deal and summing it all up.
Yeah. Leslie, quickly, you know, a lot of these world leaders know now how President Trump operates. The Japanese Prime Minister came with news of potentially 2 new factories, Japanese automakers, to the U.S. It seems perhaps that the Chinese president will come with some deliverables if it's not even a big deal.
Well, you know, Bret, one of the things that I think both China and the United States are seeing are that these tariffs haven't had the impact that they want. From our perspective, and I agree, and many Democrats agree with the president on unfair trade practices by China, but our trade deficit continues to grow. And in addition, we're not seeing factories pick up and move out of China to Vietnam and to other locations in Asia. And in addition to that, you know, what do we want long term? One of the things the president said in the 2016 campaign, a promise that he hasn't kept, was that he was going to come after China for their currency manipulation. And I don't think that's going to come up tomorrow. I think what's going to happen is both parties are going to agree, hey, this tariff on both sides isn't working out the way we wanted. We can come to some type of a deal, but I think they're going to stop going forward with more tariffs because it's not working out for either side the way they thought it would.
All right, panel, stand by. Next up, a true Friday lightning round. Looking live at Capitol Hill, the possibility of a partial government shutdown December 7th, next week. We're back with the panel. Start there on the lightning round. David, what about this? 7 spending bills left, but the border wall is still the big sticking point.
Bret, I really think it could happen. If it's going to happen, this would be the time. It's not a presidential election year. And look, Democrats are coming in January. So if you're going to do it now, you might as well do it. If you're Trump, I think there's a real possibility.
All right, Leslie?
No. Sorry, disagree. Wrong. You need the Democrats. You know, Democrats aren't going to do it for 3 reasons. 1, they don't want the wall. 2, they don't agree with the president on this and many other things, if anything. And 3rd, what's in it for the Democrats? They need the Democrats for this. They're not going to get it. Republicans should just go halfway and agree to $1.6 billion instead of $5, so at least they get what was in the original deal on a bipartisan level that agreed.
And there's other questions as well, whether the protection of Mueller, all that stuff factors in. We'll follow it next week. Morgan, I want to turn to one of the biggest breaches, data breaches we've seen in a long time, and that is of the Starwood brand of hotels. This includes Marriott. Marriott releasing a statement saying, "We deeply regret this incident happened, fell short of what our guests deserve. We expect of ourselves. We are doing everything we can to support our guests and using lessons learned to be better moving forward." But if you look at this is one of the worst cyber attacks we've seen.
It's a disaster for Marriott, Brett. You're looking at 500 million customers whose information and privacy has been put at risk here. You're also looking at what was astounding to me is that these illicit actors had been inside Marriott for 4 years before Marriott discovered it. So what you're saying is if you're a corporation in America today, you have about a 30% chance of getting hacked. And 90% of the time that's due to human error. So clearly there's a lot of education that corporations need to do with their workers. We also need to know where they're Russian or Chinese or North Korean sponsors behind this. That's what I want to know.
I have 10 seconds each. 10. That's it. Winner and loser. Morgan.
Winner, Elizabeth Dole. She had a huge foundation gala last night for Hidden Heroes. Thank you, Elizabeth Dole. Loser of the week, GM layoff. I'm very sorry for those workers. Terrible way to go into Christmas.
Okay, Leslie.
Winners, all the people that have adopted children, like myself, to give those kids a forever family. It's National Adoption Month in November, on this last day of November. And losers, Southwest Airlines for not firing the employee who laughed at a 5-year-old child because of their name and took a picture of their boarding pass and posted it online.
That was 12, David.
I better go 8. Steph Curry for responding to that 9-year-old girl who wanted basketball shoes of his and Under Armour. Steph Curry is able to change Under Armour's policy basically about making sure girls have those shoes. And loser, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, comparing obviously those migrants coming over across the border to Jews fleeing Nazi Germany. Politics 101. Don't go there. Just don't.
Pretty close, panel. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. When we come back, notable quotables.